Hi, I'm Dr. James LePage. We need to start talking about interviews. It's probably the one area of the whole job application process that causes people the most anxiety. But it's also probably one of the areas where people spend the least amount of time thinking about. You know, it's kind of strange because we know that we get anxious when we're going to do an interview. We have to answer questions, we're going to have to sell ourselves, we got to talk about our skills. But it's one of the areas that people seem to not want to prepare for adequately. Think about it. You're going to walk into a room and you kind of know what questions are going to be asked. They're going to ask you to talk about yourself. They're going to ask you to talk about your skills. They're going to ask about your work history. But a lot of times those are areas that make us uncomfortable. So what do? We don't think about it. We don't prepare an answer ahead of time. We don't really get ready for that interview. And sometimes people say, well, I'm better when I wing it. I can just step in and I can just make up answers as I go along. Well, the reason that person feels good about themselves is because they didn't know what they were supposed to be talking about. And so they come in and they just talk about anything and they think that was the right answer because it came off the top of their head. You've got to prepare for interviews. You've got to be ready for the interviews. And you've got to plan for those interviews. Yes, you may feel uncomfortable preparing for an interview. It may be difficult thinking about what you're going to say and what you're not going to say. But that anxiety you feel thinking about it before the interview is nothing compared to not knowing what to say in the interview, stumbling over some words, leaving feeling like you look stupid. Those are the things that you have to prevent. And the best way to prevent that is planning. So we're going to start today talking about some of the general do's and don'ts of interviewing. And there's a list of them, of things that people frequently either don't do or do when they shouldn't do them. So let's start with this, all right? Plan to be at the interview early, right? Makes sense, very simple. You want to give yourself enough time that if something happens, you're going to be able to be at that interview on time. The worst thing you can do is be late for an interview. We've talked about it before. If you're late for an interview, what does that tell the employer?
You're always late?
Yeah, you're going to be late to work. Something as important as an interview, if you can't be there on time, you're not going to be on time for that interview. Now, if you think you're going to be late, if something happens, traffic gets in the way, pull off, call them. All right? Call the interviewer and tell them that you're running late. Ask if it's okay if you arrive late, or ask them if they will reschedule. But do not ever just show up late. If presented with an application while sitting in the waiting room, fill it out. Even if you have filled it out before, because obviously they don't have it with them at that time. And the employer probably wants to look at your application. Don't argue with them. Don't even start saying, well, I already filled this out before. Just start filling it out. Now, if you filled out one before, eventually those two applications are going to get in the same folder. And what had those applications better do? They had better match. They had better have the exact same information on them. One of the things you should probably also do is keep a cheat sheet of all your important information. Past employers' phone numbers, addresses, dates, those type of things, so that you can always go to that and your information can always be consistent. When you meet the interviewer, greet them by their last name if you know what their last name is. All right? Say, it's very nice to meet you, Mr. or Mrs. So-and-so. If you don't know, that's if you know how to pronounce their last name. If you do not know how to pronounce their last name, or you didn't understand it when they said it, it's completely okay to ask them to repeat their last name. It's much better to ask them to repeat their last name than to continue to mangle their name throughout the interview or when you ask for a call back or you need more information. So make sure you get their name, but also greet them by their name. Appear happy to meet the interviewer. You're there. They're giving you their time. Smile, project energy. Be legitimately pleased that they are interested enough in you to take their time to talk to you. Shake hands. All right? And you don't have to wait until the person sticks their hand out first. It is completely okay for you to stick your hand out first. Yes, there are some people who really don't like shaking hands, but playing the odds, sticking your hand out first makes you look both agreeable, assertive, and pleasant. So get your hand out there and shake their hand. Look the prospective employer in the eye while talking to them. All right? Don't be looking around the room or picking lint off your clothes or looking at your paperwork. Know what you're going to say well enough that you don't have to look at your notes, and look them in the eye while talking to them. Do ask the employer about the position. One of the most important tools you have in the interview is listening to what job you're applying for. So it's okay to ask them, can you tell me about the job I'm applying for? Or tell me what exactly I'll be doing in this position. The employer will start talking to you about that position. And while he's doing that, you're listening to hear what skills you can talk about that make them recognize that you are the kind of person that can do this job. Give facts during the interview. Don't brag. You don't want to talk about, I was the best salesman that company ever had. All right? That sounds like you're bragging. Also, sounds like there's a reasonable chance it's not true. But talk about facts. Talk about the amount you sold. Talk about how you won sales awards. Talk about performance measures that you met. Talk about real world things that that the employer can use to see the skills that you have. Always conduct yourself as if you plan to take that job. Even if halfway through the interview you decide, I really don't want this job. This really isn't for me. You might, in a couple of weeks, have changed your mind. By then you may be like, that job didn't sound so bad. Or they might call you up and talk to you about a different job. Because only turn down the job when they offer you the job. If you're in the middle of the interview and you kind of tune out, or you decide, I don't want this, and you just tell them, I've given it some thought. I'm really not interested in this. I'm sorry I wasted your time. Then you're really showing that you wasted the employer's time. Never turn down a job until a job is offered. Always go through the whole interview as if you want that job. When you walk into the interview, don't immediately jump down into the chair. Wait for them to offer you a chair. So make sure that that they'll ask you to sit somewhere, they'll either say, you can have a seat, and they'll point to where they want you to sit. Or even if there's only one chair in there and it's going to be yours, wait till they offer you the seat. And show enthusiasm throughout. Always act excited, smile, all right? You don't have to be a different person than yourself, all right? I don't want you to act like some person on some television show. Be yourself, but be the best version of yourself. Be as polite and as friendly as you can be. Don't go too far. Don't make it seem strange, but be the best version of yourself. Now, let's talk about some don'ts. All right. Don't forget to bring a copy of your resume. All right. They may not have a copy of your resume. There's two pieces of information they probably will have. One is an application, one is a resume. That application is the information that they want from you. The resume is the information you want them to know about you. So give them the resume. If they're looking at the resume, they're asking you questions about the things you want them to know. And that's where you want to drive the interview. You want them focused on those areas. So don't forget to bring a copy of your resume and offer it when you sit down. Don't smoke. All right? Even if the employer smokes, don't smoke. Because a couple things are going to happen. One, you're going to be smoking, and all of a sudden you're going to have about a half an inch of ash sticking off your cigarette, and you're going to have to figure out where to put that. All right? You've got to find an ashtray, gets on your clothes, looks bad. The other is that if you smoke, some employers, even if they smoke, don't want employees who smoke. Because employees who smoke tend to take more breaks. They tend to take more health days. They tend to cost more on the health plan. So there's no reason for you to go in there and show all that at that time. So just don't smoke. If an employer asks you, so I see you worked for Washington Industries, you don't just go, yes. You need to explain what you did there. If they ask, would you be willing to work evenings? You can say yes, but you can say, yes, I have no problems working with evenings. I'm just happy to have the opportunity to come in and work for a company like this. use more than just yes or no. They'll remember the most things you talk about. And if you're just giving yes or no answers, they're not going to remember anything about you. Don't lie. Do not lie. Don't ever lie. Answer the questions truthfully. Now, you don't have to answer the questions so truthfully that you talk yourself out of a job, because we can always talk about problems to a point where we scare an employer. But if it's an area that you're uncomfortable with, give a short answer, but an honest answer. You do not want them finding out that you lied to them at some point in time during the interview. That's typically grounds for immediate termination. Don't ever make unnecessary derogatory comments about previous employers. Even if the employer or the person you're interviewing with starts talking to you negatively about your past employer, they could say, "Yeah, I know Bob, he's a real jerk, isn't he?" Even if you think he was a real jerk, do not agree. Just say something like, "Well, you know, it was really hard working there. We had a lot of pressure under us, and I learned a lot while working for them." That's all you need to say. Do not spend time bad-mouthing an employer, because if you bad-mouth a past employer, what are you telling that employer that you're interviewing with? You'll bad-mouth them in the future. Don't be that person. Never get into deep conversations about politics, religion, or anything controversial. That is a no-win situation. All right? If your employer starts talking about politics, do a lot more listening than talking. All right? It's always okay to say, "I know a lot of people feel that way," but don't start engaging in it. Eventually, that'll get you into trouble. So there's no reason to have that conversation in an interview. And also, do not discuss in the first interview salary, days off, bonuses, or retirement. Employers judge what you're interested in by what you talk about. So if you talk about vacation days, what are you thinking about? Taking days off. If you're talking about sick days that you're going to get, what does that tell an employer? You're going to use some sick days. Don't talk about those during the first interview. Have that conversation when they offer the job. If you're going to ask them questions about the job you're going to do, or the shift you'll be working, or how is performance determined. Those are things that you can ask about, but don't ask about money, and don't ask about days off until you get offered the job. Then's the time to ask.